Now that we know what arrays are, let's look at different ways that we can create them and print them. Okay, so I'm going to start with a very simple array, and then we'll work our way, or advance our way up. So I'm going to start off very simply by creating an animals array. And let me just put this in and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so what I've done is I've created an array that is going to hold strings. So by virtue of putting this brackets here, that indicates that I'm going to create an array of strings. I'm going to call that array, give it a variable name of animals. And I already know ahead of time what the values are going to be that I'm going to put into that array. And so we just hard coded in some string literals. So I put in dog, cat, elephant, and hippo. And so this automatically creates or declares an array of animals. It's called animals. There'll be 4 slots allocated in that array. And I'm initializing those slots, those placeholders, with values. And so if I want to print out cat, for example, remember that indexing starts at 0. So animals of 0 is dog, animals of 1 is cat. So if I want to print out the cat, system.out.print, typing, okay, print line, parenthesis, and I type animals, bracket 1, that should print out our cat because that's position 1. So let's go ahead and run that. Run file, there we go, that should be, okay. And so in fact it printed out the cat. So that looks good so far. Well, you might not always know ahead of time what your values are going to be. You might be getting them from calculations or you might be getting them from your user. So in that case, we need to do this a little bit differently. So in that case, what we'll do is we'll create a string, array string. We're going to call it animals. And since I don't know what my values are going to be, I need to use the keyword new string, and then brackets, I need to allocate ahead of time how many places to hold, how many placeholders to hold that I'm going to put values in. And all of those animals' job, this variable's job, is to hold the location in memory where those 4 values will be stored. In other words, let's just print out animals. And if I print out this variable animals, you will see, let's just run that. Oops, wrong one. You should see that what we're getting is a location in memory, not dog, cat, elephant, and hippo. And this is really an important thing to catch, that this variable is holding a location in memory, and therefore to get at those values, I need to do something different, and that would be to use those brackets we looked at a little earlier. So again, to print out the cat, I would put location 1, or whatever your index is. Now, at the moment, let's go ahead and print that and see what happens. We don't have anything in position 1. All we did here was declare a storage location that's going to hold 4 values, and then we are holding that memory address in animals, but we haven't put any values we haven't initialized any values. And so let's go ahead and do that. So let's do animals of 0, and we'll give that to cat. Animals of 1, let's give that to dog. Oh, I did that backwards. Let's just, for consistency, keep that the same. Doesn't matter, but just for consistency. Okay, animals of 2 is equal to elephant, and I'm purposely going to leave the last memory allocation, the last slot, empty, just for demonstration. Okay, so now if we, let's do this for fun. Now if we run this, we should actually still get, of course, cat should still print. And I'm going to run this in debug mode because I want to see these values. Now incidentally, if you don't see your variable string showing up, you can choose window and debugging, and then click on debugging, and then click on variables so that your variable window will show up down here. This is really handy because remember that when I run it in debug mode, you can see that the debug mode stopped on line 12, so it hasn't run line 12 yet. And I can look at my values and see that animals of 0 has dog, animals of cat, and then 2 and 3 are null. So that's a good way to keep track of what your code is doing. Let's just click run to finish this off. And then we see, in fact, that cat did get displayed. Okay, so let's move on with these examples. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and print animals of 3. We're just going to hide this so we don't see that. So let's put animals of 3. Now what should animals of 3 display? 0, 1, 2, 3. Well, we didn't put anything into slot location 3. So let's see what prints now. So now, index of 3 is null. Okay, here's another one for you. What if we type in 4? Sometimes programmers forget that we start counting at 0. And so if we want to get at hippo, we put in 4, which is really incorrect because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, there wasn't this location allocated. Okay, so what would happen if we put in 4? Well, let's run it and see. This is a common error that you might encounter, and it's very frustrating unless you know what it's asking you or it's telling you. So I'm going to spread this a little bit further. So this is saying you tried to allocate 4, index 4, and it threw an exception, is what we call it. It threw an error, and the error was that oops, didn't mean to do that, that index is out of bounds. There is no index of 4. So we've got an array index out of bounds exception. So that's a scary looking word, but all it means is you accessed an element that was never declared. There is no index of 4. There's 4 index slots, but not the actual index 4, just 0, 1, 2, and 3. So hopefully that helps if you see that error demystifies what that means. Okay, so let's move on. Let us assume that, remember we've always talked about, I'm going to copy this 2, 3 times. The indexing is bad. Remember, if you ever see, like I want to print out dog, cat, and elephant, so I can do print out 0, and I can print out 1, and then I can print out 2. Fantastic. Well, this is fantastic, except it's not efficient. Remember, I've talked about if you have code that is replicating itself, find a way to put it in a loop or do something so we're not replicating code. In this example, the only thing that's changing is the 0, 1, and 2, the indexes. So this looks like a good candidate for a loop. So let's do this. I'm going to do an integer. I'm going to declare an integer called length of array. And what I'm going to do is take animals.length. I'm going to take this .length property, and what this .length property will do is count how many elements, how many slots were set aside in this array, and put that number into this variable. So remember that there's not 3 elements in this array. That's 3 elements that were initialized, but the array itself has 4 slots allocated. So what gets returned here is 4, not, well, there's only 3 that have been initialized, but actually there's been 4 places that have been set aside, placeholders. So length of array is going to return 4. And so now what I can do is put this into a for loop. I less than length of array, I plus plus, and then I'm going to copy this code into here. It should go away, there we go, and replace this 0 with an I. So now each time it runs through, I is going to replace with a first time 0, so it'll print out animals of 0, animals of 1, animals of 2. And let's see that run just to be sure that that's doing what it's supposed to do. And if we look at our output, sure enough, we see dog, cat, elephant, and then remember null. Right? So let's do this. I'm going to put a placeholder here on 16 and show you maybe something that can be a little frustrating when you're debugging, and hopefully we can unfrustrate it. So undo that one, and close out all these little debug windows. Okay, so now what I'm asking it to do, we're going to debug, and we're going to stop at line 16. So I'm going to debug this file, and then if I look at my output, it does stop at line 16, so I'm good. That means that everything ran up to this line. This line is not run. I've run this line, and I'm stopped. And in fact, if we look at our variables, we can see that I is 0, which is true, and the length of array has been filled in with 4, And if we look at our animals, they should, 3 of them, there's 3 that were filled, and then the last one is a 4. So that's what was supposed to happen. That looks good. Okay, so now I'm going to explain some of these buttons a little bit more. So up to now, we've been using the step into. So if I step into this code, I'm taken directly into that print line method, which is the next method that's run. So you can see that this method is not returning anything. It's receiving a string. We've seen this before. We've talked about methods now. Okay, well, I really don't want to step through all of this stuff. I don't really care. I don't want to watch this stuff work. I just want to watch my code work. And so what we can choose now is, get the heck out of here. I don't really want to watch it run. I just want to continue on where I was with my own code. So I'm going to click on this option, this little arrow that's pointing up that says step out. Step out of this code. And I'm going to close this window. You'll notice that our debug console says we're back to line 16. So we've run. In fact, if we go into here, we can see that we skipped walking through this print statement, this print line method. This printed out, which it did. It printed the dog. And now we're sitting on line 16. So we've stopped it. We're stopped here. And this is already run. So if we look at our code, or excuse me, at our variables, you can see that I is in fact 1. And we're waiting for this line to run. So we're waiting for line 17 to run. We've stopped at 16 according to this. So what we can do now, instead of going into print line and dealing with all of that, I just want to run to the next line. So what I can choose now is saying step over. In other words, just past that method and come back to ignore going into here. Just go ahead and run it, but I don't want to see all the steps, and then come back to me who is calling that print line method. So let's choose that. Now you can see that the code is stopped at 15. I should see that cat got printed, and now we're waiting for we're waiting for 1 to run. So I'm going to go ahead and now click step into. So run the next line, which it did. Now I'm stopped at 16. I has now been incremented to 2. The very next line that's supposed to run is this print line method, which I don't want to walk through. So I'm going to choose step over that. Okay, it's letting me know that it stopped at line 15. It hasn't run line 15. It's waiting for me to step into it. So I'm going to step into, go to the next line. It's now stopped at 16. This has been incremented. I think you get the idea. Okay, so now what I can do, I don't want to finish all of this, so I can just click on continue. And now everything has run. So continue just says just keep going, just finish out the program. So it's kind of nice to get comfortable with this debugging so you can watch what your code is doing and make sure it's doing what you expect it to do. So if things aren't outputting the way you expect, this is a good way to debug it, to see what's going on. Okay, so I guess the last step that we can do is, okay, so this is certainly working, and by stepping through this as a for loop, we have access to the index. So I know every loop which index I'm on. Okay, if that's not important, here's another way that you can do it. It's synonymous to a for each loop. So if you're familiar with what a for each loop does, that's what I'm about to do. If you're not, well, I'll show you what my another way that we can loop through our array. I'm going to type in again for. Let me just type this out so that for animals. Okay. Let me type the code out and then we'll explain it. Okay. So what this is doing is the same thing as this loop is doing, except I'm not keeping track of what index I'm on. In this particular loop, all I care about is just print all the values. I don't really care what the index is, just go through each value and print it out. So the way that this works is I have to identify a new variable. This variable is, I'm going to use the word animal, and it needs to be a string. So I want to loop through each element in the array. And each time I loop through the element in an array, I'm going to take each element, I'm going to put it individually into animal, which is why animal is not an array. It's going to hold a single string. The single string being each iteration. The first time it's going to hold dog, the second time it's going to hold cat, the second time it's going to hold elephant. So this is a shortcut method. I use this colon and then the array that I want to loop through. So this is saying loop through the animals array, and each time you loop through the array, put the value into this string. So in other words, all I'd have to type out now is system.out.print line, and then the word animal, because animal is holding each individual string. So this is going to do the same thing as I've done here. The only difference is now I'm not keeping track of my A. I have no idea what the indexes are. I just run through each one. So that should do the same thing. And in fact, it does. Well, I'm getting a little tired of seeing this null, so let's just do a little if statement to keep that null from showing. I don't need this debug anymore. So let's do this. Let's do an if statement, if animal, I'm going to spell, not equal to null, then print out the animal. Otherwise, this will eliminate this null. So let's see if that works. And sure enough, it does. Okay. So hopefully this video has given you some examples of how to create arrays, different ways to loop through arrays, and reminding you of how we access each individual element in that array. And also remembering that this value, this variable, holds the memory address and not the actual values that I need to get into each index to get to the values. All right, so next we're going to write some code with arrays.